Okay. Yeah. So yeah. Okay. So welcome to today's lecture. So before yeah, going to the discussion or lecture, so let us just try to see that how many lectures we have. I think including today's lecture, we have I think I can take three lectures including today. That means today 23rd. Then the next lecture is on 30th March, and the next one is on the next Tuesday, that is on 6th or 7th, maybe I'm not sure. So these are the three lectures I can take as per the schedule. And whereas in the last class, that is on April 13th or 12th, so that I just take the test. So whatever we covered in the that April 6th lecture, that is just preceding that. So that way we have three more lecture classes, okay, and then maximum and then four tests, including today's test. Okay, yeah. Okay, so that's all about this one regarding our the course and all. And then okay, today's test will be start at 11:25. Okay, so it will be half an hour test. So 11:25 to 11:55. So we'll stop the lecture by 11:20, and you can take the exam from 11:25 onwards. Okay, and uh, and uh, and I think the TAs are I think they are evaluating the your quizzes, and now you can see the response system because the first initially for the three tests, I think they have evaluated together. So that time actually we were not aware of just showing the responses. It means that we are also not much have knowledge about these teams because I used the teams earlier, like last I think last semester also, and there I'm unable to take the tests in the teams because at that time through teams I'm unable to take the test for a student for a large number of students like more than 150 or so, because that time I used to take image processing. The strength is about 270. So that time it was not supported. It was not supported means the way I have used was not supported by Teams. So therefore I have not used. So this time I think I come to know through the other faculty, Professor Mal actually. So he told, and then so that way we are using that. So initially we are not aware of that actually how to show the responses. So because of that, what I had done is that I had taken Excel sheet of your answers, and then the students are the faculty, the TAs are evaluated that, and you have shown only marks and the correct the solutions. So then some of you have asked that in the architecture they are showing. So then we checked with them. So with that we come to know that how to do it on the how to do the evaluation on the team through Teams itself through forms. So that way now the TS have again evaluated, and now you can able they have posted the I think the evaluation so that you can able to see the responses as well your marks also, right? And again, as told you at the beginning itself. So since the class is very huge, I cannot respond to you each of you that's the reason I at the very beginning itself I categorically divided the class into four groups, and each group I assigned a specific TA for the CA part and as well as the OS part also. So that way, if we have any questions or any queries, anything, if it is required, because the students also, all of them are mostly MTech and the research scholars and all, so they are like competent to clarify your queries and all, very, very, very matured way. No doubt about that. So please check with them, and if you have still queries and all in the class itself, we can try to resolve that. So I think so far five quizzes are over, and then today there's one more quiz, and then there are another three quizzes will be there. And I told like at the beginning itself, the evaluation part is that it's not that all quizzes will be considered for your grading process because of the present situation. So we'll take some best of as I told, like 75% or 70% of the like overall all the tests together. So the best of the 70% of the tests will be considered. Okay. So that way, even for one or two tests, if you're not done well, or if you have any power problem, or if you are about to submit but the system has closed or whatever, so those issues will be taken care of because of this kind of taking a best of a subset of your the overall quizzes and all. So that way, and another thing is that, as I told you, mostly the grading will be done as a relative way. So therefore, you need not worry about the absolute sense of the marks. Maybe sometimes the quizzes may be tough, sometimes it may be easier. So therefore, you need not worry about that. Also, and because it's relative performance, so therefore, it will be taken care of that. Like whether it's a tough or easier and all, it hardly matters to that extent. Okay. So, so mostly you please try to contact your TAs through emails and all. I also informed the TAs and all, so they will be responsible. They will be responsive whenever you send a mail, or you can contact them even through the mobiles also, mobile numbers also. Okay, so and most probably by next week or so, I will ask the TAs to give you the whole consolidated picture. So that means so far we have 6 quizzes are over. In each quiz, how many marks you have got, a kind of Excel sheet I will ask them to prepare and then show it to you, so that you will also get some idea about that. Okay. And another thing is that like the quizzes are like sometimes 10 marks, sometimes 20 marks are there. So therefore, what I will do is that to make it like uniform way, I'll split them into all of them as 10, 10, 10, 10. That means suppose the quiz is conducted for 20, I'll split it into 10, 10, two halves. Suppose you got 16 marks, it means that you have 8 and 8 marks you have got. So that way I'll just make it into flattened to all of them as a 10, 10 marks. Out of that, I'll pick up the best 70%, 75%, something like that. Okay, so don't, yeah, that's all about the evaluation part, because you don't have much time also. So that's the reason I'm just giving you one more time about the evaluation part. Okay. Okay, then, okay. So we'll move on to the today's lecture, and we'll stop at 11:20, because 11:25 have test and all. And another thing is that don't go to the extreme, the last minute and all, like that's what I'm suggesting. Maybe you may lose 1 mark maximum. So therefore, my suggestion is that whenever I tell last minute or just before that, you please submit, right? Or 2 minutes and all. At that time itself, try to wind up and submit and all. Okay, so that you don't have any problem in the like unable to submission and all. Okay, yeah. Okay, so okay, then we'll move on to the today's lecture. So let me share the presentation. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Is this slide is visible? Hello?
Yes, sir. It's visible.
Yes, sir.
Huh?
Visible.
Visible. Okay. Yeah. Right. So in the last class, yeah, the topic preceding to this is the implicit threading that we have discussed. Under that, we have just discussed the different approaches. One of them is the thread pools, and other two are like more or less similar, like OpenMP and the grand switch kind of a thing. It's nothing but the user will specify the portions where the code can be parallelizable by indicating to the by inserting some directives and all, so that when the system, when it's compiling or during the runtime and all, it will identify that, and there it create the threads, and then takes care of the efficient execution of the program wherever threading is possible and all. And anyway, thread pools also we have discussed very detailed way, where the beginning itself will create the multiple threads, and so that the thread creation time can be avoided, can be minimized. And then the threads are waiting for their task, and whenever there is any request, then the task will be given to thread, and then it will complete, and then afterwards again waiting in the queue, waiting in the thread pool. So that is the way it happens and all. Then coming to the when you are discussing about threads and all, there are various issues that we can able to see here, some of them in this presentation. And so one of the issues will be like you can see here, there are some listed, some of the list, some listed issues were given, some list of issues were given. One thing is that some like this kind of system calls, like a fork system call, exit system call. So this is normally we have seen with respect to the process. Suppose in case of multi-threaded process, suppose when the thread is invoking these system calls, fork and exit system call, then how it performs and what are the issues in the semantics of these particular system calls. So that we'll try to discuss. And another thing is that signal handling. Signal handling, we'll see that what is signal. Signal means if some event occurred, so that will be informed to the process by using a signal. And again, there are two types here, the synchronous, asynchronous. We'll see that distinction, what is meant by synchronous signals and what is meant by asynchronous signals and all. And in this case, we know that if it is a single process, if it is a process having single thread of control, then the process will manage or the OS will manage. And now here is that in case of, in the context of threads, now the process has a multiple threads of execution. So if the signal has arrived, or the signal is generated, for example, by some means, then where the signal will be handled. So which thread will be handled, or is there all threads can handle? So these are the issues and all. We'll see that. And the next one is the thread cancellation of target thread. Suppose you have multiple threads of execution is there in the process. And if you want to cancel a specific thread, and or like multiple threads, for example, then how do we do that? So there are again here the way of cancellation process will be, there are two types, asynchronous and default type. We'll see that what is the basic distinctions between these two. And then what is meant by thread local storage? What is meant by thread local storage? So what is this? How it is different from the normal way of the global variables and other things. And then the last one is scheduler activations. We'll see that what is the scheduler activations and all. We'll go one by one. The first one is that in case of threads, in the context of threads, multi-threaded process, the semantics of fork and exit system call. So we know that in the normal case, the fork system call means it will duplicate the process. It will duplicate the process. Then after that, based on the exit system call, whether the child process will be the actual duplicated, whether it continues, or a new process or a new program will be loaded into that. And here in the context of thread, like in the context of multi-threaded process, for example, a thread is invoking the fork system call. So in that case, a thread is invoking a fork system call. So in that case, whether the new process or the child process, whether is it a complete duplicate of a process with all the threads, existing threads, or whether it's a duplicate of a process contains only the specific thread, whatever the thread that is invoked the fork system call and all. So there are two different versions of this one, of executing this fork system call. So there are the operating systems will support one of them, or like both the versions also will be supported. So it means that what I'm saying is that when the particular thread is invoking the fork system call, it means that a process will be created, child process, whether the child process contains all the threads, whatever the original process has, or a child process contains only the specific thread which is initiated, which is invoked the fork system call and all. So these are the two versions are there. So depending on some operating systems will support both of them, and some of them will support one of them. So that way there are two versions, and depending on the requirements, we can use the one of them or the specific. And basically, usually, when the thread is invoking the fork system call, and after that, suppose if that process, the newly created process, and where if you are executing the exec system call, it means that whenever the exec system call will be enabled or when we invoked, it means that the created process, the new child process, will be replaced by the desired program, some other program and all. So in that case, suppose if the thread is invoked a fork system call, so at that time there are two options are there, where the new child process may contains all the threads of a original process, or a new child process may contains the only thread which is invoked, the fork system call in a single specific thread. So in these two options, if the child process after that, if the exec system call is about to execute following that, so in that case there is no need to create the process with all the threads and all, because anyway whatever the child process was there, so that will be replaced by the new program, because the exec system call will do that. Suppose there is no exec system call after the fork, it means that the process is the duplicate process. The process is a duplicate process. It's exactly the same process, whatever the parent is. That's what if there is no exec system call is invoked after the fork system call. Otherwise, suppose if you want to generate a new process, so in that case, after the fork system call, we create a process. It is initially a duplicate of the parent, but afterwards it was replaced by the exec system call given by the specific code, whatever it is. So therefore here, when the fork is executed, when the fork is invoked by a specific thread, out of these two options, so it will take the option of creating a duplicate with only one thread, because anyway that is going to be replaced by the exec system call. So therefore, usually it will take that option and all. Otherwise, it has to create the entire duplicate of a process and all. And anyway, whatever it is again replaced by the new program, whatever the exec system call will specify and all. So therefore, usually based on the presence of exec system call, the fork process, the fork system call will create the duplicate with only a specific thread and all. So that way the fork system call will be invoked by the multi-threaded process. That depending upon the presence of the exec system call, it will create either all the threads or it will create the process with only the specific thread and all. Okay. So then the next issue was whatever mentioned is that how to handle the signals in case of multi-threaded situation scenario. So the signals are basically nothing but the signals are used in Unix systems to notify a process that a particular event has occurred. A particular event has occurred in the system in a computer when a particular process is under execution. So that event will be informed to the process or informed to the system by using signals and all. So it means that suppose a process is executing, for example, and when it's executing, suppose, for example, the division by 0 is about to occur, for example, or otherwise when it's executing and it tries to access the illegal memory addresses and all. So these are the different events that may occur by the process itself. Or sometimes when the process is executing, I think some earlier said there is some maybe some device maybe interrupt to the process. Maybe some device earlier it is performing some task. Now the task is over. So then it will be informed to the CPU. It will inform to the CPU. So that is also a signal and all. So that way, whenever there is some event has occurred, so that will be informed in the form of a signal. It will be informed in the form of a signal. So whenever the signal is arrived or signal is generated, so to handle that signal, to process that signal, there is a procedure or there is a procedure known to be signal handler. And the signal handler will handle the signal and process the signals and all. That means, for example, you have a division by 0 has occurred, for example. So the signal handler is nothing but just simply displaying a message saying that the division by 0 has been occurred in the execution of the current process and all. Or likewise, some illegal memory access is attempted. So that is the way the signal handler used to be handle the signals and all. And so here, yeah, that's what the signal is generated by a particular event that we have already mentioned. And the signal will be delivered to a process because some process will be under execution at any point of a time by CPU. So therefore, whenever the signal has been generated, it has to be delivered to a process in the normal case. And then the signal will be handled by the signal handlers. So there are two types of signal handlers. One is the default signal handler and the other one is the user-defined signal handler. Default signal handler means it is supported by the operating system. It is supported by OS. So for OS, whatever the signal is generated, So for each signal, it has some handling mechanism. It has some process to handle that particular signal. As I mentioned, displaying the message kind of a thing, or otherwise doing something with respect to that particular signal and when it's encountered. So therefore, the default signal handler is nothing but it is provided by the OS and all, operating system and all. And sometimes for certain signals or for a particular application program or whatever, the application programmer will provide the signal handlers. So that is going to be user-defined signal handler and all. Suppose if the user-defined signal handler is available when executing a particular process or whatever, so at that time, so this user-defined signal handler will be overridden the default signal handler, because there are two types. Like OS will handle all the signals, and at the same time, some programs when it is execution, the users will write the signal handler. Suppose when some signal is occurred during execution of program, then to handle that, the user will specify that how to handle the signal, how to manage that particular signal and all. So that way that the default and user defined. So if the user defined signal handlers are available, then then at that time the default signal handlers will be overridden by the user defined signal handler. It means that the signals will be handled by only user defined signal handlers and all, if it is there. If it is not there, then the default signal handlers will handle the signals. That means the operating system will manage the signals, will handle the signals and all. So that's what every signal has a default handler where the kernel runs this one, and the user defined signal handler will override the default one. And here the signals, as I mentioned here, there are two types of signals can be generated. One is that when the process is executing, so because of the execution of the process, also some events occurred. As I mentioned, examples, a kind of division by zero, or some arithmetic overflow, or maybe the illegal memory access. So this is all these events are occurred because of due to the current execution of the program, current execution of the process and all. So at that time, when the event is occurred because of the process execution, the present process, current process execution, then those signals are known to be the synchronous signals and all, because these are generated because of the execution of the process. So these synchronous signals has to be handled by the process itself, because these signals are generated by the process because of the process execution, right? Due to the illegal memory access, or due to the division by zero or whatever. So this is known to be the synchronous signals, and these signals are usually pass on to the process itself, where the process has to handle that. And asynchronous signals means when the process is executing by the CPU, at that time, without the knowledge of the process, a signal will be generated because of some other device, because the other device may be doing something else, and then it has received some input, or otherwise it has to display something. So then the device will send the signal and all. So the sending the signal by other devices and all, they are asynchronous. They are not at all related to the current execution of a process and all. So those signals are known to be asynchronous signals and all. Those signals are known to be asynchronous signals and all. So then how to handle those asynchronous signals? So there are two types of signals: synchronous signals and asynchronous. Synchronous signals are basically generated by the execution of a process, current process, which is executed by the CPU. And asynchronous signals are nothing but, they are nothing to do with the process. They are generated from the other peripherals, other devices in the system and all. So for that also we have a signal handlers are there for asynchronous signals, or both the synchronous signals and all. And usually for synchronous signals means they will be usually handled by a process itself, because they are generated, they are obtained because of the process execution. And asynchronous signals and all usually either maintained by either taken care by the OS operating system, or sometimes even the process also will handle that. And here the issue is that, suppose if the process is a single threaded process, then there won't be any issue. That whatever the signal that is arrived, so you are passing to the process where the process has single thread, only single execution sequence. Then there is no issue. Then the process will handle, or otherwise it will pass on to it will switch the mode. It will pass on to the kernel, and the kernel will take care of that. But if the process is a multi-threaded process, then how to deliver the signals, or how to handle the signals and all, because a process contains the multiple threads, multiple execution sequences are there. So in that case, so how to deliver where to deliver the signal and all. So there are different options or different ways the operating system will take care of that, or the process will take care of that. One thing is that deliver the signal to thread which the signal applies. So it means that this is the case where the one whatever I have mentioned, synchronous signals, because there are multiple executions that are taking place, and because of a particular execution, the signal has generated. So in that case, you need to deliver the signal to a particular thread which is the cause for the particular signal generation. So that is the first one. And the other one is that deliver the signal to every thread of the process. Because suppose, for example, the signal is asynchronous signal, for example. It means the signal is nothing to related with the current executions of the process and all. So in that case, one way is that you can deliver to all the threads of a process. That is one option. And other option is that deliver the signal to certain threads of a process, because among the multiple threads of a process, there are certain threads they will accept the signal. That means they can able to process the signal. They have a capability to process the signal. And there are certain threads where they block the signal. That means they don't process the signal at all. So that way, you can say that when the signal has arrived, then you can able to pass the signal through a threads where they don't block, or otherwise where they can process the signal and all. Or otherwise, assign the specific thread to receive all the signals. Yeah, maybe among that depends. That depends on the way the OS or the APIs are designed. Like among the threads, there will be one thread will be specified where all the signals has to be reached to, all will be handled by only that particular thread and all. So in that case, so these signals can be generated. These signals can be sent to that particular thread. So asynchronous signals means you can say that one example will be, suppose a program is executing, for example, some program. And then suppose, for example, you are just keen, you want to kill the process, for example. You want to kill the process by using, by giving the command through the keyboard and all. So then that is a signal, because there is now the process is executing and you want to kill the process. So therefore you are, that means by using keyboard, you are generating a signal. And that is one of the examples of asynchronous signal. So likewise, you have different examples. Suppose, for example, you are transferring some data or some process, for example, some event, for example, some device, some peripherals, and also some event has been occurred, some data has been arrived, or some other thing happened. So that also will be viewed as the signals in the asynchronous sense. So that way, in case of multi-threaded process, we have multiple options, we have multiple ways it can able to handle the signal, either by using a specific thread meant for signal handling, or otherwise there are some set of threads which will not block the signals, so they can able to handle, or otherwise if there is in case of synchronous signals and all, where whichever the thread is responsible for generating the signal, so the signals will be passed to that particular thread. So likewise, there are multiple ways you can able to handle the signals in case of multi-threaded process, and that depending upon the strategy, that depending on the OS designer, whichever the policy it will be followed. So based on that, the signals will be handled. But anyway, by default option, by the standby option, anyway, the OS will support to take care about the signals and all, whatever it may be, either it may be synchronous or asynchronous. The next one is the thread cancellation. Here thread cancellation means, suppose if you want to, suppose there are multiple threads are there in the process, for example, and you want to cancel, you want to terminate a particular thread, or terminate some set of threads and all, or terminate all the threads, for example. So that is known to be a thread cancellation. That means forcefully you want to cancel the thread, or you want to terminate the thread. So this happens sometimes. For example, a scenario where suppose you have a very huge database and then you are asking for some query. That means you generate some query, that some client has sent some query to search for something, to get some information. And then since the database is very huge, and to resolve the query, or to get a response to the query in an efficient way, instead of having searching the whole database in a sequential way, you can generate a multiple threads, or you can have a thread pool where you have multiple threads are already available, and you can assign a job to all these threads simultaneously, where each thread will look at or will search for in the subset of the database. So that way there are multiple threads simultaneously search the database, and in that case, for example, whatever the query you are passing, so you will get a response from the one of the thread, because the response will be there at certain place in the database. And now you are searching the database through multiple threads simultaneously. And suppose the one thread has come back saying had obtained the response back. So in that case, there is no point in continuing the execution of the remaining threads, because whatever the response you are expecting, that response is already received by the one of the threads. So there is no point in continuation of execution of the other threads and all. So therefore, at that time, you need to cancel the thread. You need to cancel all the threads, the remaining threads and all. And likewise, suppose, for example, you are browsing something and suddenly you don't want, and then you want to cancel that. So simply you just click the delete or this one. So, but at that time when you are initiating the browsing and all, so there are multiple threads maybe like generated, multiple threads maybe given the job for searching a page or whatever. So at that time when you are deleting, at that time all these threads has to be cancelled and all. So there are the situations where you need to cancel the threads that depending on the various scenarios, as I mentioned here. And basically here the thread cancellation means you can say that a thread to be cancelled, and that specific thread is known to be target thread and all. And there are two approaches of cancellation. One is the asynchronous cancellation, and the other one is the deferred cancellation. Asynchronous cancellation means a kind of forced cancellation. That means it terminates the target thread immediately. That means a particular, we are from specific thread, you want to like terminate some thread n, for example, then you specify that by that a thread n has to be cancelled. So here immediately you need to cancel the thread n. So this is going to be asynchronous cancellation. And the deferred cancellation means it allows the target thread to cancel in a safer way. It means that each thread, the specific thread, target thread, whatever it is there, and here it periodically check whether the thread is asking for cancellation or not, whether the cancellation mode is enabled or not. If it is enabled, then it will cancel. Then the thread itself will be cancelled after a point where it can be safely terminated and all. Otherwise, in case of asynchronous cancellation, the problem is that suppose, for example, a process are sharing the data or the threads are sharing the data, for example. And here, suppose you are cancelling a particular thread, for example, and in that case, suppose that thread is involving or handling the shared data, for example, and it is in the middle of the modification of data and whatever. And now, if you are forcing to cancel that particular thread, so now that thing, because now the thread is manipulating the data, which is shared by the multiple processes and all. And if that manipulation is not done in a right way, then the data inconsistency happens, and with that you can that means the execution of a process maybe finally end up with the erroneous way and all. So those are the issues with the asynchronous cancellation, where whenever you are trying to cancel the thread, so you need to check that whether the thread, currently the thread is executing the shared data or any crucial segment of code and all. So in that case, if you cancel the thread, then there will be chances of the erroneous results may happen because of the data inconsistency and all. So that was the reason that where in case of deferred cancellation, where you try to avoid that situation and all. In case of deferred cancellation, when you are attempting to cancel a particular thread, and the thread will cancel or will terminate at a safer position and all. That means it will check the flags such a way that at a particular point where there won't be any issues in the cancellation in the termination of the particular thread and all. So it is known to be the deferred cancellation, and most of the operating systems will support the deferred cancellation, and some of them also support the asynchronous cancellation also. And the details of asynchronous cancellation is not, we don't cover that much because that is involved a lot, because there are chances of, in case of asynchronous cancellation, because you are suddenly asking the thread to terminate. So that leads to like erroneous results because of because at that particular point of a time, if a thread is handling some crucial code or the code that is shared by the multiple threads, that leads to the errors and all. So therefore, you need to handle that in a specific way. And then, canceling a thread, for that, anyway, the thread library will support that using this particular function, like a pthread cancel, specifying the thread ID. And so here, as I mentioned here, for cancellation of a threads, you can say that there is a mode of thread cancellation, and this is the state, and this is the type, right? And suppose if the mode is off, that means there is nothing, like you don't need to any cancel the thread and all. So it is now at that time, the thread state will be disabled. It means that the cancellation state is in the disabled mode. At that time, there is nothing to do. The thread will perform its normal execution. So each time, in case of a deferred cancellation, the thread will check its state, the flag, whether the flag is either on or off. Based on that, if it is enabled, it means that the particular thread that is requesting for cancellation. So therefore, if it is a default type, then it will then it takes care of cancellation at a safer point and all. That means here, if it is handling some crucial section and all, it tries to execute the remaining instructions also before cancellation, and then after, once it come out of that particular crucial section, then it will be terminated and all. So that way, in case of deferred mode, for that particular those thread and all, it just periodically check the state, whether it is enabled or disabled. If it is disabled, then no issue at all. If it is enabled, then it realizes that the particular thread has to be cancelled, terminated. So in that case, it tries to manage for termination in a safer way. Like that sort. If the thread has the cancel disabled, then the cancellation remains pending, and until the thread is enabled set, till it enables that. And then the cancellation occurs when the thread reaches to cancellation point. Cancellation point means, as I mentioned, like the safer point where the thread can be terminated and all. Thread can be terminated. Normally, the usual termination will be there at the end of its execution, like exit 0 or something. And now we are cancelling the thread before that. So therefore, before that, where the thread can be cancelled without creating the issues. So that's going to be this one. And here, so each thread, as I mentioned here, it will check its status by using this particular function, pthread test cancel and all. It means that periodically it will check this, it will invoke this particular function. So with that, it will come to know that whether this thread is state is enabled or disabled. If it is enabled, then it will invoke the cleanup handler and all, so that that particular thread will give up its resources, and then it just makes sure that like the thread is about to cancel and all, like. So that way, this thread cancellation can be done by using these two approaches and all. Default cancellation and asynchronous cancellation and all. Okay. Okay. Yeah, the next one is the thread local storage, and here we know that in case of a threads where in the process they share the data, basically the global data and the other heap data and so on, and again for its execution, because each thread has its individual execution. So therefore, to maintain its execution, track or trace properly, it has a stack, maintains the stack, and then it has a specific registration register set. So with that, the status of the thread will be maintained, and the execution status of the thread will be maintained. And sometimes the thread may contain the multiple functions, and across the functions, it has to use the variable, or it has used the data consistently across all the functions and all. So for that purpose, it will use a variables which is local to the thread, and then that variable will be seen by the functions that are present within the thread and all. Usually the local variable means, suppose when you declare a variable within a function, so that existence of a variable will be there only within the function. The moment once you come out of the function, then the variable will not exist at all. Variable will not exist at all. So that way here, but when you are executing a thread, a specific execution sequence, so in that if there are some multiple functions are there and you want to maintain, you want to track a particular variable across these functions, right? So whatever the variable that is used in the first function, the same variable has to be maintained, has to be continued in the second function, third function, and so on also in the entire transaction or entire the thread and all. So in that case, you need to maintain some local data or local variables and all. So that is known to be thread local data or thread local storage and all. It's a kind of static data where the data will be realizable across the functions in our normal programs and all. Similar to that here also, in the thread, in the complete the trace of a thread, if you define a thread local data and or variables and all, so those variables you can able to observe across all the functions that are present within the thread and all. So that is what mean by the thread local data. It did not confuse with the local variables. Local variables means, so these are the variables defined within the function, and those variables existence will be there only in that particular function. The moment once you come to the next function, then the variables will not exist at all. The variables will not observed at all. So that's what mean by the local variables. But here the thread local storage or thread local data means the data or the variables, whatever you are defined within the thread, and that can be observed, that can be used across the functions that are present within the thread and all. So that is known to be a thread local storage and all. A thread local storage. That's what here it was discussed and all. Like you say, the local variables visible only within a single function, whereas the TLS is visible across the function invocations of a particular thread and all. Right. So this is about the thread local storage. Okay. Then the next one is scheduler activations, and this is this is just the important thing in view of how we have seen that the various thread models like the many to one, many to many models, one to one model, and so on, where we have observed that like you have threads in the user level or at a user space, we have threads are there, and then for supporting that at a kernel level also we have threads are there, and these user threads are mapped onto the kernel threads for allocating the CPU and so on. So this is the way we have various thread models for there. And here we'll see a bit more details about how the kernel threads supports the user level threads scheduling and other activities and all. And so basically here we're taking the illustration with respect to the many to many model. That means at a user level we have multiple threads, and at a kernel level also we have multiple threads. And here the many to many model means the number of kernel level threads are less than the number of user level threads, right? And now you have to map these user level threads to the kernel level threads for its execution and all. So in the normal sense, when the user level threads are in execution means the thread library at the user level, it tries to here to have an interaction between the user level threads and the kernel level threads. So there will be some intermediate data structure will be maintained by the kernel, and it is known to be a low weight process. It's known to be a lightweight process and all. So the user level library or the thread library that is there in the user space, it will schedule the user threads onto the lightweight process, which is a data structure supported by the kernel or kernel threads and all. And here that means here the kernel will and this lightweight process will appear like kind of a virtual processor for the user threads. So therefore, here the thread library at the user level, it will assign these user threads to this lightweight process, assuming that it is assigning to a CPU and all. But the actual allocation of this low weight process, the lightweight process, to a physical process will be carried out by the kernel thread, by a kernel thread. That's what here you can see that. So typically use of intermediate data structure between the kernel thread and user level threads, and it is in the form of a lightweight process. And through lightweight process, this user thread is mapped to a kernel thread, and in turn this kernel thread will assign this lightweight process to one of the physical CPUs and all. Right, lightweight process attached to kernel thread, and then how many lightweight process and all that is determined by the kernel threads. And now here what happens is that suppose the user level thread is assigned to a lightweight process, and this lightweight process is again attached to a physical process, a physical processor, a physical CPU and all. And now when the user level thread is executing, and then here it suppose when it's executing at that time, it is encounters a system call, encounters the IO operation. So this IO operation is performed by system call. So therefore here it realizes the just raise the system call, and the system call will be handled by the automatically it has to handle by the kernel thread. So when the kernel thread is handling that particular system call, and that system call happens to be a blocking one, it means that you are asking for some IO, and now that IO is not readily available, and you have to wait in the queue. So therefore, here the kernel thread, when it's executing the system call, the kernel thread will be blocked because it has to wait for a particular IO in the queue. So therefore, the kernel thread is blocked. So the moment the kernel thread is blocked, it means that it blocks the the blocking thing. It has to be observed in the user level thread also. That means the user level thread also will not progress at all, because whatever the system call it is raised, the system call was blocked. So therefore, the kernel thread realized that it was blocked, and with that, the user level thread also will not progress at all. And for doing that, the kernel thread will realize that the system call has been blocked. So therefore, here this kernel thread will inform to the thread library at a user space using the upcall handler and all, using the upcall handler. So usually see that why this name upcall handler is usually the user process will interact with the kernel thread to perform its system calls. So therefore, the user program, whenever the IO instruction or whenever the IO is required, at that time the user program, by using some API, it will call the system call, and the system call will take care of that particular desired IO and all. So here, so that way, the normally the threads or the user program will contact the will make use of the kernel services and all. But here what happened when the kernel is executing or implementing its system call, the system call was blocked. That means system call is go to the waiting state and all because of some event to occur. And here at that time, the kernel will realize that the system call is blocked. So in that case, here to inform this event to the thread library, because the thread library does not aware of that. Because here what happens, the thread, this particular thread, whenever the IO is required, then it invoke the system call using API, and the system call is taken care by the kernel. Now the kernel realized that that particular system call was blocked, and now here to perform the efficient threading. So this blocking nature of this blocking information has to be informed to the thread library, so that the thread library will schedule some other thread for its execution. Otherwise, no, this thread will be blocked. So therefore, here what it will do for that, the kernel thread here will be informed to the thread library in the user space by using upcall handler and all, using upcall handler. So the kernel will inform to the thread library using upcall handler. That means upcall handler is nothing but it's a procedure. So it runs now immediately whenever this kernel thread is blocked, then the kernel will invoke this upcall handler. Then it will be run on this lightweight process. Then the upcall handler, with that the user thread library will realize that this particular thread was blocked, and then immediately it will note the history of this particular the thread. That means the control information, the status information of this thread, the CPU, and so on. And then the new thread will be invoked, and the new thread will be placed onto the LWP, and with that the kernel will schedule the new thread and all. So and likewise after some, so that way the kernel will inform to the thread library about whether the thread was blocked or not. If it is blocked, then the user thread library will schedule the new thread, some other thread, and so that the execution will continue without waiting for this one. But after some time, whatever the system call that was blocked, it will realize that now that input is available or the data is available, so that will be passed on to the thread. And now the kernel will come to know that the earlier thread, whatever is blocked because of this blocking system call, so that will be again has to be informed to the thread library, stating that the earlier the particular thread which is blocked, Now the data is available. Now it is ready for execution and all.
The overall operativity going ahead. In FY21, there was hardly any supervision on account of disruption due to COVID-19. However, in FY22, there will be a strong store expansion, and the company is focusing on opening new small format stores, which will help in optimizing the CapEx. If we compare the operating balances with other southern-based players, as well as which is likely to be listed soon, Thundermile revenue per square feet.
Hello. 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 Yeah.
Hello,
Somebody
yes, sir. Your voice is audible. Yeah.
Hello.
Hello, yes, sir. Your voice is audible.
Yeah,
Sorry.
right. What happened in between? I think some other recording was parallelly played. Huh?
Someone has turned on the mic, sir. That's why the noises came.
Correct. Some was turned on, but I don't know. No, what I'm saying is that after I stopped my lecture, but still there is some continuous recording was played. That's what I heard. Is it correct? No, is it that happened to you also? Others?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Like, yeah, fine. I don't know why.
I think so. Some TV was on some participant.
Is it that? I don't know, but it appears like a lecture only. I don't know. Okay. Anyway.
Yes, sir. It
Yeah,
was
maybe
a
that actually,
recorded.
maybe some other video lecture may be played, or I don't know. Yeah, whatever.
Yes, sir.
I know I'm not. No, because it happens to be like from. I can also hear that one, so I thought that is there any fallacy in that? Okay, fine. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Come back to. Yeah. Can you see the slide now? This scheduler activation set.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So here, what I want to convey here is that the coordination between the user thread and the kernel threads, how the kernel thread will inform to the, because the thread library that is managed by the user threads is there in the user space. So it doesn't know about actually what is happening at a kernel level and all. So that's the reason that kernel has to inform to the status to the user thread library, stating that, yeah, whether this thread is blocked or not. If it is blocked, it has to inform that, yeah, thread has been blocked. Then the user thread library will take some necessary action that actually whatever is the status of the thread and all, so that will be saved. And then that particular thread is replaced by some other thread, so that the execution will continue and all. And in the same way, suppose the thread whichever is blocked earlier, so now that data is available, and now that particular thread is ready for execution, for example, even that information is also not is known to the user thread library, because that's there in the user space. So that will be known to the kernel and all. So therefore, the kernel, when that waiting is done and when whatever the IO that is required, that is taken care. So now the previously thread, whichever is blocked, so now that can be runnable. Now they can able to run that particular thread because that IO is completed and all. So even that information also the kernel will be passed on to the user thread library in the user space using this upcall mechanism, using this upcall handler and all. So that way, these the kernel level threads and all, they coordinate with the user level threads through this thread library using this upcall handler and all. So usually the system calls are coming from downward, like application programs. They need the kernel services, so therefore they make use of APIs, and with that they interact with the kernel and all. And now here the information is passing in the other direction. That means from kernel to the user space, you are passing the information. So that's why these are known to be the upcall handler and all. Okay. And then we'll see some examples how these threads are incorporated or implemented in the standard operating systems. We don't go details. The first one is the Windows threads. And so here, all these Windows systems like 98, NT or whatever. So all these things support the multi-threaded execution. And here for execution of this multi-threaded execution, the way it is implementing this threading concept is one-to-one mapping. We have seen that. It means that every user level thread is mapped to a specific kernel level thread and all. So it's a one-to-one mapping. And here the thread contains the following information. Each thread has thread ID and a register set representing the state of a processor, and a separate user and kernel level stacks, because you see that there is a user thread and then the specific kernel thread will be associated to that. So to maintain to execution of the particular thread, if it is if it is happening in the user space, then user stack is required. If it is happening in the kernel space, then the kernel stack is required. So therefore it maintains both of them. And then the private data storage is also required. As I mentioned, like thread specific data, thread local data is required for running these libraries and all. And anyway, these register set stacks and private storage are known to be a context of a thread. Because that maintains the status of the particular execution sequence. So therefore, it's known to be context of a thread. This is basically when you are switching a thread from one thread to other thread, and the user thread library has to maintain these thread control block, or you can say that thread specific data. And later on, when the same thread has to be scheduled, at that time, whatever the thread, wherever it stopped earlier, the same status has to be reflected on the CPU and all. So for that purpose, we use it. And here, in case of Windows, to maintain this, for each thread, it maintains the three data structures. Here, E thread, K thread, and TEB. Whereas this E thread and K thread, these two data structures are maintained within the kernel space. Like this is the user thread block, and this is the kernel, executive thread block, and this is the kernel thread block. And this thread environment block, this particular data structure is maintained by the user thread library, and this is there in the user space and all. It basically contains the thread ID, the user space, the stack in the user space, and the thread local storage and other things. So we'll see these data structures a bit illustrated way, in a diagramic way. And here you can see in the kernel space, these are the true data structures will be there. This is the execution thread, and this contains the pointer to the starting of the thread, pointing to the starting of the thread. And again, the pointing, and it is again, there is one more pointer to the parent process, because this is one of the thread. And again, there is a pointer to a kernel thread, because the user thread and kernel thread are like one-to-one mapping will be there. And then it is pointing to the kernel level thread. And here the kernel thread data structure, it contains the scheduling information, synchronization information and all, because the thread is after all execution and all. So it has to be executed by one of the CPU, means then it should have some scheduling priorities, or it has to be scheduled by some scheduling algorithm. And at the same time, the thread, when it's executing, it may have a dependency with respect to other threads and all. So therefore, it has to be, for taking care of that, some synchronization information also has to be maintained. And anyway, the kernel stack, and again, this is connected to the data structure that is present in the user space and all. That is known to be thread environment block. And this thread environment block, actually, this contains this is known to be the thread context and all. This is known to be the thread context. When the thread is executing, so this particular information will be saved by the thread library, and whenever again the thread will be switched, then again this will be reflected and all. This will be again replaced with the desired. So this is the way the Windows maintains the using three data structures. It supports the multi-threading using one-to-one mapping and all. Then coming to the Linux part, here I'm not going to discuss anything. So here in case of Linux hardly discriminate the threads versus the process and all. It doesn't hardly discriminate those two things and all. It treat the thread as well as the process as the task and all. Inherently, it treats the process, either a thread or a process, whatever it may be, it is treated as a task and all. So therefore, and here, so when you are creating a process or when you are creating a thread in the Linux system, it basically uses the same system call inside. As we know that we have seen that we are using a fork system call and all. And that fork system call will internally actually call the system call known to be clone. Like fork is nothing but a wrapper on top of this one. A clone system call will be there. It's a generic system call. And in this clone system, with this clone system call, you can create a thread, and as well, you can also create a process also. But the difference between the usage of this clone system call is nothing but whenever you are invoking a clone system call, you need to pass some flags. You need to pass the flags. You need to just like some flags has to be set and some flags has to be like to be set in other way and all. So based on the flags, the clone will realize that whether it has to create a process, new process, or whether it has to create a thread and all. So basically what I want to convey here is that in case of Linux, there is no specific distinction between the process and a thread and all. For creating both of them, internally it will use the same system called clone. And then when you are invoking this clone system call, you are like activating a certain flags. So based on that, the amount of sharing will take place. For example, if you are activating all the flags, suppose we are activating all the flags, it means that the created one is the thread and all. It means that the created one is thread. It is that it's not that the new memory, the new address space is allocated. For example, if you see these are the flags, different flags, and a clone FS means file system information is shared, and a clone VM means this flag indicating that the memory space is shared, and the signal handler means the signal handlers are shared. And likewise, the files means the files whichever is open, those are shared and all. So these are the various flags and all. And when you are creating the thread, for example, that depending on the requirement, these flags will be set. So when these flags are set, it means that whatever the resources are specified by these flags and all, they are like shared by the newly created task. I'm saying task. It's not neither a process nor a thread and all. The newly created task will be sharing. These are the resources, whether it may be a memory space or a file system or signal handler or open files or some other thing, whatever it is. So like when the task, when you are set these flags or set, all of them are set, it indicates that the task, whatever you are creating, so that task is sharing all these resources from the parent process and all. Suppose if you don't set these ones, it means that whatever the task you are generating, whatever the task you are creating, so that particular task will not share these things at all. It will again recreate, it will take a copy of that separately, and then it takes care of that. So that way, in case of a Linux, when you're creating a task means, so you need to pass the flag, different flags, set the different flags. So based on the flags, we'll come to know that to what extent the newly created task is sharing with the parent process and all. So if it is a threads and all, so then you need to set the flags, most of the flags, so that it will not take a copy, it will not make a copy of the resources. It just create a process and then it will make the pointers, and the pointers will be point to the parent process resources and all. And if it is a duplicate process, or if it is a process, a separate process, in that case, these flags will be reset so that there won't be any sharing at all. So whatever the parent process is there, so all of those resources and all, again, it will make a copy fresh, and it will be given, it will be attached to the child process and all. So that way, in case of the Linux system, the threads are differed from the process by using these flags and all. Okay, so I think this is the last slide. And yeah, now we just let us. Yeah, let's have 10 more minutes. Just start this, and then we will stop this one, the lecture and all. Just we'll stop. We'll just start an initial, because otherwise we don't have much time also. Just I will start another 10 minutes, and I will discuss the introductory related to the process scheduling and all. Then we move on to continuing the next class on 30th. Okay. Yeah, is it clear now? Is it visible, process scheduling? Okay. Hello? Hello? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Good. So yeah, this process scheduling is not nothing new and all, because when you are discussing about in the third chapter, concept of process and other things and all. So we come to know that the process will go through the different states. And one of the state is that in the running state, it means that the process, when it is given to the CPU, the execution of process is nothing but we say that at that time the process is in the running state and all. So here in this particular chapter, basically we'll try to discuss about how these processes are scheduled to the CPU and all, or how these processes are given to the CPU in a systematic way, so that we'll get the benefits of the various aspects like a multi-programming and interactive like processing and all these things and all. So that way here the topic whatever we are discussing, it's not new. We are already come across this one. And also here our focus is mainly that how these processes are scheduled to the CPU and all. And here these are the various things we'll try to discuss in this particular chapter. We don't cover all these topics here and all. Maybe we may go up to like the first 5 topics, like basic introduction, then the scheduling criteria. That means on what basis the process has to be scheduled, like what are the parameters or what are the measures and all. Then what are the various scheduling algorithms. And then we discuss a little bit about, we know a little bit about threads also, because the process and threads and all, they have their own distinction and all. So in that case, how the threads are scheduled, okay. And then we'll slightly touch upon this also, multiple processor scheduling. It means suppose the process, suppose we have a multi-core processor or system having a multiple processors, for example. So in that case, how the scheduling will be, what are the issues? So those things we'll discuss. And the remaining part and all, we don't have much time to cover. Instead, we'll go to the next topic, like a process synchronization we'll discuss in place of that. Okay, yeah. Then coming to the objectives, I already have mentioned here and all, like to introduce the CPU scheduling. It's basically the CPU, if you do the CPU scheduling efficiently, it's nothing but we are encouraging or we are performing the multi-programming in a very effective way and all. Like that means that multiple programs we are executing like in a concurrent way, So that is what if you perform the CPU scheduling very effectively, like make the CPU to be busy most of the time. So that the multiple programs can be run like you can say that in a concurrent way. And so to describe the various CPU algorithms, we'll see that, and then discuss the evaluation criteria. Suppose we have various CPU scheduling algorithms are there. How do you evaluate them? Like what are the metrics with which you can able to evaluate that? And another thing is that since we have multiple scheduling algorithms, which one will be the better for a specific application, for a specific task, or for a specific applications, or for specific environments, which scheduling algorithms are preferred over the others and all. So these are the various things we'll try to discuss in this chapter. And then coming to the basic idea, basic like concepts here. In case of when you're saying that the process is executing over the CPU, if you see the nature of a process, it has, if you look at the sequence of execution of a process and all, or sequence of the code, the instructions in the process, there is initially maybe the process needs the CPU, like inputting the data from its memory, and then inputting the memory instructions, do some computation and so on. And after that, maybe it needs the IO. So for receiving the IO from the like input device, or it has to give it to output and all. At that time, CPU will not do that. CPU's job is that it has to load the data from a main memory or a cache and do some computations, whatever, by using the ALU. So this is what the CPU will do that. And afterwards, whenever there is file reading options, or like reading the input from a keyboard, or printing the data onto a display. So all these things and all involving with the other peripherals and all. So therefore, when you look at the program, the sequence of code, the sequence of instructions in a program, you can be able to see that a portion of a code where the CPU will actively participate and CPU will run the code, CPU will execute those instructions and all. And there is a portion of a code where the CPU doesn't need and the involvement of other peripherals are required, known to be the IO involvement and all. Then again, after completion of IO, again the CPU may use that the data whichever is received from IO, and again afterwards again maybe IO may be required. So likewise, if you look at the program, you can have a sequence of CPU burst and IO burst will be there. CPU burst, IO. CPU burst is nothing but those are the set of instructions where they are executed by the CPU. They are executed by the CPU, like load, store, and add, and all arithmetic logical operations. So all these things, computational operations, everything will be done by the CPU. It will do it. But to capture the input from a keyboard or otherwise to make the file transfer from the secondary to the primary or secondary to this one. So all those things and the CPU will not involve in that. So that is known to be IO burst. That is IO activity and all. So likewise, but the program to execute, it has to execute the entire code. So therefore, we can view the if you view the program execution as a sequence of the CPU burst and IO burst. Like sequence, so there are multiple CPU bursts, IO bursts, and it will come alternatively. You have set of instructions where the CPU will be involved. Then afterwards, IO may be required. Then at that time, the CPU is not at all involved. Then after the IO is over, then again you need to have some instructions which are meant for computation. Then again the CPU is required. So likewise, if you look at the execution sequence of any program and all, you have alternatively like the CPU burst and IO burst will be there and all. Right. So now if you look at the CPU burst distribution, suppose if you take a process and the process may execute based on its nature, it may execute a quite long time. And if you analyze the burst timings or the burst times of the CPU burst of the particular process, suppose the process may run for 5 hours, for example, and if you analyze the code or if you analyze the program execution, and you can able to see a sequence of CPU bursts and IO bursts are there. And here this particular plot is nothing but just to illustrate how what will be the distribution of the durations of the CPU bursts. So when you analyze that, that means whatever the total 5 hours of execution sequence, where you identify the CPU burst and what is the duration of each burst, and those durations, if you just plot them in the histogram or in the distribution plot, you can able to see the plot something like this. And now here the x-axis is the burst duration, and the y-axis will be the number of bursts. So if you look at this particular plot, what it observed here is that when you analyze any program, most of the programs where there are majority of the CPU bursts have the small durations. You can see that you can see a peak here at the lower side of the burst duration, and then afterwards you have very few bursts having a longer duration. And here in this case, you can see that there are majority like less than 5 milliseconds. The burst duration, you can see a peak here and all, and afterwards it tapers down, and then it's almost like very few bursts having the larger duration and all. So this is the scenario for most of the process and all. And now you need to see that this is for certain for some processes, very few processes where the CPU burst durations will be slightly larger, and that depends upon the nature of a process and all. So here for a particular process, when you analyze that, most of the CPU bursts having the durations smaller than like 5 milliseconds and so on, right? And this is very important because when you are scheduling the process on the CPU, so you need to see that what will be the CPU burst time this particular process is expecting for the next CPU burst, the next when it's next execution and all. So that depends upon the CPU burst. Suppose we'll see that when you're discussing about the process scheduling, we'll see that what is the importance of the CPU burst, why it is so important, and so on. And so the CPU scheduler is basically that the process scheduler is nothing but you can say it's a CPU scheduler, because ultimately the process scheduler will schedule the process on the CPU. So therefore, as we discussed that the process scheduler, there are like 2 or 3 different process schedulers will be there as we discussed in the context of process, long term, short term, medium term and all. So in that, the most important one is the short term scheduler, where the processes are placed in this queue, and then the scheduler will allocate a process to the CPU and all, one after another and all. So this is a short term scheduler. And because the process time, the CPU burst times, as we have seen that the burst times are very small, like order of the milliseconds. So that means when you give the process to the CPU, so because the burst time is small, like 7 milliseconds or 8 milliseconds, upon execution of 7 milliseconds, then the process will be stopped because the process needs the IO. So that the CPU cannot do that, so the process will be switched. The process will be suspended from the CPU, and it will be given for the IO will take care. So OS will take care of the IO and all. So that way here, that way it's not be short-term scheduler because the CPU bursts are smaller. So therefore, frequently the CPU needs the process. Some or other process is required and all. So it maintains the queue, and the queue can be of the different ways you can able to maintain the queue. And usually the CPU scheduling decisions will be carried out in these four scenarios. In these four scenarios, the first one is that switching from running to the waiting state. So it means that whenever the process is running, and after some time when the process needs to be wait state, so at that time the CPU needs some other process to be run, some other process to run, right? So that is one situation. And second one is that running to the ready state, because sometimes the process is running and suddenly the process will be taken, will be switched to a ready state and all. That happens. That happens because some interrupt occurs, for example, during execution, then immediately the interrupt has to be handled. So therefore, whatever the current process is execution, so it is stopped and it will be pushed into the ready running state because it's still can able to run, but because of the interrupt, the process execution will stop. And third one is that switches from waiting to the ready state. It means that some process which is in the waiting state and its waiting is completed. That means that input is completed and whatever the requirement for waiting, it is completed. Now it is moved back to the ready state. At that time also, sometimes the process execution, current execution of process will be stopped. That depending on the requirement and all. And the fourth one is the terminates. That means when the process reaches to the last statement, then it naturally terminates, right? So at that time also CPU needs some other new process to run. So therefore, these are the four occasions where the CPU needs to be scheduled. CPU needs to be scheduled with a new process and all. Anyway, we'll discuss these things a bit more detailed in the next class. Okay, now it's 11:20. So we'll stop here this lecture, and please wait for the teams to answer the quiz. Okay. Yeah, I'm stopping here. Yeah, let me stop the lecture. Okay, stop the recording. Okay, I'm stopping the recording. Okay.